That's ragtime. That's the most pure form of ragtime right there. That was the Maple Leaf Rag, written by Scott Joplin, composed in 1897 and published in 1899. It was the first piece of instrumental music to sell over 1 million copies. The ragtime era we sort of consider as starting about 1897 and extending to 1917, when the term jazz became more prominent in American popular music. But for that 20 years, that would have been the rock and roll of the day. Ragtime music was what was the essence of popular music, and Scott Joplin was considered the man who was writing what America's classical music would be, and that's the way they sold his music. Scott Joplin was considered America's classical music genius, and ragtime was considered what America had to offer to world music. And there was something very special about ragtime music. It was different from everything that had preceded it. And that is that almost all the kinds of music that have been played before basically were on the beat and didn't have that essence of syncopation that was at the heart of ragtime music. And by that I mean putting the beat in between where it would go naturally. And first of all, you notice in the Maple Leaf Rag you've got a very regular 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. Well, that was from the march. And John Philip Sousa, Stars and Stripes Forever, that kind of thing, that was the popular music of the day. And what ragtime added to that, it was a syncopated march. So it has, the Maple Leaf Rag has the same number of sections as a march. It's put together pretty much in the same form. You've got that first A section, runs 16 bars, then it's repeated, so you have AA. Then the second section, the B section, that's all B, so we have 2 of those, so it's A, B, B, and then we go back to the first section again. Then we go to C, which we call the trio. That's the same way that it was in the marches, which is 2 of those, and then the last section, the D section. We do that twice, and that's the whole thing. So it's A, B, B, A, C, C, D, D. The trio adds a flat to the key signature, and that's just right out of John Philip Sousa. In fact, some of the rags were called marches. In fact, the Maple Leaf Rag, which was recorded by the Marine Band, was labeled as a march. That was what we call a rag. And the syncopation idea, which I'll give you again here, that's putting the beat in between. Now, nobody knows quite where ragtime came from. When it came on the scene, they were talking about being able to play any kind of music in ragtime style. That was to rag. So if I took a tune like My Gal Sal, they call her frivolous Sal, a peculiar sort of a gal, with a heart that was mellow, an all-round good fellow was my old pal. You know that. You've heard, if you're old enough, you might remember Joe the Bartender from the Jackie Gleason Show. You'd actually have to be pretty old to remember that. The song I played was a waltz from the early part of the 19th century. But what if I was going to rag that, let's say, and I'll move it back to the original key. So that's ragging it. So I put it into 4/4 time or 2/4 time, and not played as a waltz, and I add all those syncopated figures, and that was 2-rag. And when ragtime first became popular, they would take sometimes they would add a ragtime chorus onto the sheet music. It would be the last page, and the arrangers would add all of that syncopation to it. So you had ragtime songs, you had the classic rags like we just played for you, and from all over the country, miraculously, suddenly ragtime started appearing in 1897. The question I have, and I wrote the book on ragtime, literally, which you can get from Jazz at Lincoln Center, called This Is Ragtime. It's been republished recently, and the great Wynton Marsalis did a new introduction to it, as well as Phil Schaap, who was responsible for getting it out, a great new edition. We'll put that plug in there. I always had a hard time figuring out, well, where did ragtime come from? And there's a lot of theories about it, and I think the best one that I can come up with right now is that it was taken from the way the slaves played music on fiddle and banjo. And what they were doing, they were taking songs that were popular with the owners, and the owners are of Scotch-Irish descent, so often they were playing for dances that would be reels and jigs. And they would take these reels and jigs, and when you play those on a fiddle and banjo, if you're playing a banjo, it's got that 5th string up there. You can't help but be playing it in a kind of a triplet time. So that kind of a feel almost naturally comes from a banjo. And the banjo was indeed an African instrument. It was brought over here, so the slaves were playing these Irish songs, and when you take these reels and play with that kind of a feel, they were in 2/4 time. When you play that and put in this, you naturally put in syncopation on the banjo. So in 1897, by that time, musicians who had been we'll say the freed slaves even were playing piano and transferred that rhythmic idea to the piano. So I think that there was probably a lot of ragtime piano players that we don't know anything about. We certainly weren't making records, and nobody was really recording what they were playing. But suddenly in 1897, that idea came to the fore, and it may have been circulating around for a long time. Nobody quite knows. But then suddenly it was every place. And Scott Joplin came out of the Midwest. He was in Sedalia, Missouri, where he had gone to college. He was published by a white man named John Stark, who really saw the genius in his work, published the Maple Leaf Rag. And then the rags came out from all over the country. There were ragtime songs, and Tin Pan Alley was coming to fore at that time. Incidentally, Tin Pan Alley was named because somebody noticed that if you went down the alley behind where the song publishers were and you heard them demonstrating songs, which they did in their little offices on a summer's day when all the windows were open, it sounded like somebody had taken a wash tub full of tin pans and thrown them down a staircase. That's the name Tin Pan Alley. That was the New York publishing industry. And people like Irving Berlin, who was one of the Jewish immigrants from Russia who populated Tin Pan Alley, were writing truly American songs. His big hit, you might remember, was Alexander's Ragtime Band. That was in 1910, and that sort of gave ragtime another boost. It had already been around for 10 years. But before that, he was writing these ragtime songs. As a child, I went wild when the band played. How I ran to the men when his hand swayed. Clarinets were my pets, and a slide trombone I thought was simply divine. But today when they play, I could hiss them. Every bar is a jar to my system. But there's one musical instrument that I call mine. I love a piano, I love a piano. I love to hear somebody play upon a piano, a grand piano. It simply carries me away. I know a fine way to country to Steinway. I love to run my fingers over the keys, the ivories, and with the pedal, I love to meddle. When Paderewski comes my way, I'm so excited, I'm just delighted to hear the long-haired genius play. So you can keep your fiddle and your bow. Give me a Piano. I want to stop right beside an upright or a high-toned baby grand. And Tin Pan Alley is publishing thousands of those things during the ragtime era. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, you've got people like U.B. Blake, who was my piano teacher, that were inventing ragtime pieces that had a little bit more punch. And he was playing all the ragtime songs, working on the East Coast. But he also came up with these great test pieces that he had to compete with the other piano players. And these were rags that were much more complicated and more difficult to play than what Scott Joplin came up with and some of these other people. And he wrote this piece, which I learned how to play back in the 70s. Yubi sent me a manuscript after I contacted him. It's called the Charleston Rag. This is written in the same year as Maple Leaf Rag, except it wasn't published until we put it together back in the 70s and put it into a folio. This is Yubi's masterpiece. That's ragtime.